My name is Mustafa, but I've been baptized into Michael, and there's a very specific reason for it. But I'm going to talk about my circumcision. I'm 40 years old. I'm Turkish, and I live in the Netherlands. I was circumcised at the age of 7 to 8. It was during August when my parents took me to a holiday vacation to their hometown, which is in Adana, Turkey. And I can show you a picture of it. This is how I was at the age of 7. And this is how they prepare young boys in Turkey, or usually in Islamic cultures, to prepare them for their circumcision. I still remember standing next to this thing. I'm not really sure what it is, but that's beside the point. I was really happy. I was promised lots of toys, lots of fun stuff, and we were going to have a good time. It didn't quite happen that way. In Turkish society, it's very common to circumcise a child between the age of 5 till 10. It's only done on boys, and I think around 98 to 99% of the male population is circumcised. It's a sunnah, which means a recommendation. You don't have to do it. Most of these circumcisions at my age, this was in the 1980s, was done by some local man who wasn't certified, and mine was botched. I had to undergo 2 more circumcisions afterwards to undo the mistakes of the first one. My frenum is cut off. My half of my foreskin was cut off very, very messily, and it has caused a major trauma in my life. I didn't trust my parents anymore. One of the key things I remember from my traumatic experience is that my father was dancing and my mother was sitting next to me on the bed, and she was crying because I just couldn't stop crying and screaming. And because my father seemingly was in a good mood and my mother was seemingly in a incompetence mode, I resented this. The thing about traumatic experiences is it can and usually does distort reality, and it's also a memory, and memory is never 100% truthful. It's just the way human nature works. However, I just couldn't trust my parents anymore because the moment they said that we are going to do this or we're going to do that, or I want you to do this, I always was anticipating that there was a catch to it. And sometimes I would be proven correct because my parents were very, very fundamentalist Islamic people. But more often than not, there was no danger at all, and this really made me resentful. I don't trust you. I don't trust the two of you. You tell me to do some groceries, and I was expecting somebody to cut me up. It didn't happen. So are you lying to me? It was all sorts of fantasy, coping mechanism, paranoia, which began to influence me at the onset of puberty. And sometimes my parents would caught me trying to sexually discover myself, as most 11, 12, 13-year-old boys do. And they said to me, if you touch yourself one more time, we are going to cut it off or we are going to burn it off. And I believed them. So I was utterly frustrated and also afraid that my parents are going to cut me up again or kill me because they did it before. And because of that, I began to distance myself from Turkish society. We were also living rather isolated from the rest of Turkish society, so it wasn't that difficult. And I began to resent my own people. Whenever I would see Turkish men in particular, I would just freeze up. I would be afraid, is there going to be another Sünnet? Is it going to be mine again? Please don't touch me. I don't want to see you people. And I would just look for excuses to not be around people anymore. I was depressed and out of work without a true meaningful relationship, without any direction in my life until I was 35 years old. Afterwards, I had a psychotic episode caused by my trauma in combination with drug misuse. I used to be an alcoholic. I decided to change my life. And one of the first things that you have to do when you want to change your life, when you have a botched circumcision, is to acknowledge it, that it has happened to you. And very, very, very importantly is to stop blaming people and start forgiving yourself. And the way you forgive yourself is to, this is not something I did by myself, I sought help, is to be open about the trauma. This is really uncomfortable for most people, if not all, for most men, if not all. Then you have to undergo the traumatic experiences. I have had what's it called, EMDR therapy, where you have to follow sounds or emotions, and at the same time you're recalling the memory of the trauma. I've had several of these sessions, and now I'm basically, I wouldn't say cured, but I've been able to deal with my trauma. The next step is to learn to forgive yourself, and you have to find somebody to train, to help you, to tell yourself that you could have done nothing at the time. As I was a child, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I always switch between blaming myself and blaming my parents, and that caused me to really despise myself and to hate my parents, which is sort of unheard of in Turkish society. To hate your parents, to actually beat them up or spit at them or yell at them, that's a great taboo in Turkish society. And I was slowly but surely going to be a little bit more toward the abusive side when I was trying to talk to my father, mostly because I kept blaming my father. You should have protected me, but you didn't. We never made up, and I still regret it from time to time, but I have to understand things happened the way they did, and I can't I can't change the past. So forgiveness is the only way to actually cope with the situation in a healthy manner. I had to tell myself every single day, you did the best you could. You were in survival mode. Now you can grow up, literally and figuratively. And I think I died at the age of 8, and I began to live again at the age of 35. So since I technically consider myself to be 5 years old again. My parents also told me that besides stopping of wetting my bed, it was also euphemism for that I wouldn't masturbate. They assumed that I knew what it was at the age of 8, and they assumed that I would not bother masturbating. They were slowly, talk around the bush. Is that the proper American expression? I'm not really sure. But this is something that the Turkish people often communicate when it comes to sexual issues to their children. They often use euphemisms and distractions to explain something, and it never made much sense to me. But they said, since you're circumcised, you shouldn't be wetting your bed anymore. And if we catch you doing it, we're going to cut it off or we're going to burn it off. And I believe them. I actually believe that they would do it. Yeah.
Do you know other men like you who resent their circumcision?
Not in my close vicinity. I mean, in the milieu where I live in the city of Eindhoven, I don't really hear Turkish or even Moroccan men talk about it, let alone on the forums. However, I am on the international forums where they are talking about restoring your foreskin. And I have seen many people from Indonesia, Syria, North Africa, or other Islamic countries where they are talking about resenting their parents for what has been done to them, and their story, not as severe as mine, but is sort of similar. Too much cut off foreskin, and where they basically have a painful erection, or they basically have trouble peeing. Fortunately, I don't have that, but for some reason, in the Turkish community, unless I'm not looking, careful enough, you don't hear or see much about it. I think I might be one of the few. Yeah. However, there are signs which I can perceive as being Turkish myself, is that a lot of Turkish men, I'll just keep it to my own people, I'm not going to talk about the Arabs and the Moroccans, but just the Turkish men, the Turkish young boys, the second generation, who are born after 1985, compared to their female peers, their sisters, their female cousins, they often live on social unemployment benefit, or they have no job, or they fail at school, or they are in crime, or they suffer from substance abuse a lot compared to them. I do see a correlation of having a very bad sex life, unable to keep relationships with non-Muslims, and I do believe that this is caused by the fact that girls are not circumcised in Turkish Islamic tradition, but boys are, and that is something I do see. But I don't walk up to them. Is it because you're circumcised? That's not a proper way to talk about this, and they would probably more than likely deny it. There's no discrimination or racism or discrimination on age or gender. Nothing of the sort here in the Netherlands. But there is the thing of where our own communities basically treat girls 10 times better than the boys. When the Turkish boy has a botched circumcision, well, tough luck. He'll just have to deal with it. If something would happen to a girl, I can assure you that the entire community would be upside down. And how could this have happened to our baby daughter? Or she's such a beautiful girl. Oh my goodness, what is going to be happening to her, etc., etc. And that is one of the causes, I think, of why men who are circumcised have so many issues. What would actually really help in the immediate future is to put it to a certain age, age of consent, starting from the age of 18. Excuse me, where a young man can decide whether he wants to circumcise himself, wants to have himself circumcised for his parents or not. Right now there is no consent, so Turkish people just force their son to undergo this, whether he wants it or not, and they use all sorts of tricks like they did to me to make us comfortable. And of course, young children, they don't know how to say no to their parents, and they can be tricked and manipulated into thinking that this is good for them. And that is what I really think that's the first step to making this truly abhorrent practice illegal.